Hello, algebra. So here I am. I'm going to talk to you about the zero product property and how you can solve quadratic equations by factoring. So here we have the zero product property says, and what it says. I'm going to write that out for you guys, and then we'll talk about what it means. So the zero product property is pretty interesting, I think. So it says that if I have the product of two numbers, a times b, and that when I multiply those two numbers together I get 0, then a is equal to 0, b is equal to 0, or both. A equals 0 and b equals 0. And I think you guys already know this, because imagine if I asked you to solve this following equation. And I said 3 times x is equal to 0. Most of you automatically would say x is equal to 0, Sarah, because you know 3 times 0 equals 0. That's because no matter what x is, if I multiply these two numbers, 3 and x, and my answer is 0, one of those factors has to be equal to 0. In class, I usually have students generate a list of numbers. I'll say something like, give me any two numbers whose product is 0. And students immediately shout out 3 times 0, 7 times 0, 0 times pi, 19 times 0, 0 times 0. These are all numbers. 48 times 0, 1002 times 0, right? So in each one of these pairs, when I multiply them out, they all end up equal to 0. In each one of them, one of the numbers is 0. Because I know if I'm multiplying to get 0, 0 has to be one of the factors. And that's what the zero product property is saying. If I multiply two numbers, and my product zero, one of them had to be 0. One of them must be 0. And we use this fact to solve quadratic equations. So let's do an example. Let's say I have this equation here. And I say x squared plus x minus 6 is equal to 0. This is a quadratic equation. That degree of 2 makes it quadratic. And if I want to solve this, my first step is actually to do something we've been working on for a little bit. My first step is to factor. And I end up with x plus 3 times x minus 2 when I factor those together. And now what I have is the product of two things. If I take x plus 3 and I multiply it by x minus 2, I get 0. So if I have a number a and I multiply it by a number b, and my answer is 0, then that means that either a is 0 or b is 0. That's the zero product property right there. So now what I have here is I have the product of two numbers. My first number, x plus 3 could be 0. Or my second number, x minus 2 could be 0. And then I just solve each one of these little mini equations here for the value of x. So I subtract 3 from each side, x equals negative 3, add 2 to each side, and I get x equals 2. So right away you'll notice here I have two solutions. And if we wanted to check our work, we can. Our equation says x squared plus x minus 6 is equal to 0, and I'm claiming that either one of these will work. So I could substitute that in. Right? So I'm saying if I take x some number and I square it, and I add that same number back and subtract 6, I get 0. One answer we had was negative 3 plus 3. So let's test this out. Negative 3 squared gives me 9. Oops, that's supposed to be negative 3 there. And now I'm saying subtract 3, subtract 6, and that's equal to 0. And that gives me 0 equals 0. Yay! So negative 3 works. That's a solution. That's an answer. Now let's check our other solution. So I also say that 2 is going to work here. So let's say that we have 2 squared and add 2, subtract 6, and what do we get? 4 plus 2 minus 6 is equal to 0. 6 minus 6 equals 0. 0 equals 0. Yay! So that's true too. So then our solution for this equation, we have two solutions. And I want you guys to practice writing them like this. We have the solution negative 3 and the solution 2. These are called brackets or braces. These are called braces. And this is a way that you can write a solution when you have more than one. And we're saying x could be negative 3 or it could be 2. They're both going to work here in this case. Let's do another example using the zero product property of one that's like a little bit harder to factor. And then so you guys can have some practice watching me factor that as well. So let's solve this equation here. Let's say we have 12x squared plus 11x plus 2 is equal to 0. So I'm going to factor this by grouping. And so I'm going to, you know what, I'm actually going to use the AC method. I kind of hate grouping. So I'm going to take my A and my C and multiply them together. And it's going to give me 24. I'm going to list factors of 24. 1 and 24. 2 and 12. 3 and 8. Oop, and then I noticed that 8 and 3 make 11. So I'm going to break it up like this. 12x squared plus 3x plus 8x plus 2. And because 3 and 8 add up to 11, I haven't really changed this. And this is all still equal to 0. I'm going to factor this by grouping these terms together and taking out the GCF. So I'm going to have 3x times 4 plus 1 plus 2 times 4. Oh, sorry, not 4 plus 1, 4x plus 1. 4x plus 1 equals 0. And I have a common factor here and here that I can take out. So then this becomes 3x plus 2 times 4x plus 1 equals 0. And now I can use the zero product property. And I can say I have the product of two things in parentheses, and that equals 0. So that means this one could be 0, or that one could be 0, or both. And then I solve each of these mini equations for x. So x could be negative 2/3. Or x could be negative 1/4. So then, like I said, I want you guys to get practice writing in solution.